Found my girlfriend cheating on me with my close friend. I have him arrested and ghosted her. Backstory. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a medium-sized town with a population of about 30,000 people. We met when we were little, approximately 6 or 7. I can't remember exactly. We were almost inseparable. We began dating when we were 16 years old. We went out for employment when we were 18 to a city just a few hours away. We were married and had purchased our first home before the age of 20. We found out she was pregnant with a son when she was 22. Then catastrophe hit. A massive shelving unit fell and crushed her around 5 weeks before she was set to go on maternity leave. Both she and our kid were murdered instantaneously, according to what I was informed. 2 of her co-workers had also been wounded in the accident, one of whom was paraplegic and the other who had to have his leg amputated. In order to save money, the firm she worked for opted to keep using old shelving that had been written off as hazardous rather than replace it. I still haven't forgiven the executives and management employees who made that choice, since they killed the love of my life while also terminating our pregnancy. It wasn't long after that I was informed I had an option about how to continue with what her firm termed compensation, but I referred to it as blood money. They hoped to avoid a lawsuit by settling out of court. In contrast, I was out for their blood. Just to be clear, this is not the vengeance, it is still background. Fortunately, because of the media attention and the involvement of various politicians, the issue was resolved promptly in court, approximately 3 years, with a settlement for all parties that was close to 10 times the amount that they had first promised. They were fined heavily for violations of work, health, and safety regulations. Executives were fired, others were imprisoned, and so on. Perhaps a tale for another time, when I feel more at ease telling it. I was still working in telecommunications at the time. My mother, bless her soul, had moved in to assist me while all of this was going on. I suppose I would have broken down if she hadn't been so interested. Around this time, I was given a promotion, but it required extensive travel around the state. I asked for an office in my hometown's branch because I wanted to take care of companies not only in the state, but also in my hometown, where there was no business representative, and they agreed. We got into a schedule of 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks touring the rest of the state after a few months. After a year, I decided to purchase a home in my hometown so that I wouldn't have to remain at my parents' house every week, or so that I was home and could come and go as I pleased. This is significant later in the plot. Our narrative starts around 4 years later. Sorry for the lengthy history. On Friday, I had just returned from one of my excursions and was checking in some items at my office when Harry, the branch's managing director, stepped in. We had grown up together as well, but had gone to separate schools, but had built a really strong connection since returning. He inquired as to how things were doing, and then invited me to a home party he was throwing that evening. Even with the short notice, I said sure. I felt like I deserved a couple beers with my buddies. That's where Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new recruit at the branch where my hometown's office was situated, and she was still getting to know everyone since she was new in town. We hit it off right away. As corny as that may seem, it was almost as if Rachel were in front of me instead of Catherine. I won't go into too many specifics, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step and she moved into my hometown's house. Everything had been going swimmingly up until this moment. Catherine and my parents got along, and Rachel's parents were pleased that someone could make me as happy as Rachel had. Things had been going smoothly for over a year when things started to shift. Skype chats were abruptly cut short. Neighbors would tell me how a vehicle, reported to me as Harry's, was constantly spotted parked in a back alley near my home while I was gone, and some clothing that weren't mine were in my closet. All indications led to her infidelity, but she claimed that nothing was going on. She said that Harry would drop over on occasion to talk business, but he never remained the night. I put it up to paranoia and carried on as if nothing was wrong, but there was always this nagging sensation that something wasn't quite right. It was over 6 months later that I found she had been deceiving me. I had recently negotiated a rather significant deal with a new firm, and the discussions had concluded sooner than I had expected. So, rather than staying for a few more days, I decided to book an early trip home and surprise everyone. After a few hours, I drive into my hometown and into the alley behind my house, hoping to sneak into Catherine's house and surprise her. However, I was interested to see whether this mysterious automobile was present. There was, indeed, a vehicle obstructing the rear entry gate. I was perplexed for a second, wondering whether it had been a careless neighbor who had parked, only to find it was Harry's vehicle. I may have drove right past my own house if it hadn't been for the thick hedge line I'd installed a few years ago for seclusion. I stepped out of my vehicle after pulling up behind his automobile and felt it was odd that he was there so late. As she said, he had always departed by now. As I got closer to the rear of the home, I saw something that made my stomach sink. Catherine and Harry were hammering it out in my kitchen. I went completely still. Time stood still. My close buddy was having with my girlfriend on my kitchen bench. I had no idea what to do. So many thoughts raced through my mind. Was I dreaming or was I awake? What was the point of them having in my house? Feeling discouraged, I turned and walked away without anyone noticing. For what seemed like an eternity, I sat in my vehicle. I was in tears. Hard, however, the melancholy immediately evolved to rage. The same type of rage I felt for those responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to inflict pain on them. Badly. I am a pacifist who does not believe in violence. I knew then that I was going to punish them and ruin their life. And what better time to get started than right now? I drove back up the alley, far enough away from my driveway to see Harry's vehicle, and then went back to the gate, where I could see inside the house, and dialed her phone. They were still going for it when the phone rang. When my name appeared on the caller ID, they both performed a double take. I could see she was thinking about answering it, so they let it ring. They were back into it after a few seconds. And I phoned once more. She did respond this time. I hung up while she was replying and returned to my vehicle. She phoned me back as soon as I did. She inquired why I was phoning so late, and I said that I was about 10 minutes away from home and didn't want to frighten her away by coming in. She was definitely surprised and seemed pleased that I was coming, and the conversation ended abruptly when she stated she was going to get up and change into something. I said my goodbyes and hung up the phone. A few seconds later, Harry walked through the gate, still half nude, and leaped into his vehicle, speeding away like a bat out of hell. I grinned a bit, knowing how terrified both of them would be at the prospect of being apprehended. I waited a few seconds before driving into the exact spot where Harry had been moments before. The rest of the night was very quiet, and I didn't get up until she was sleeping to go to my office down the hall. I couldn't get to sleep. I needed to make a plan. And I made a plan. The retaliation my mother raised me to be a pacifist and to let cosmic karma take its course. But on this particular instance, I concluded that karma might use some assistance. I planned to punish them both individually, but to destroy them both. I was aware that Harry had a drug problem. It wasn't anything important, but he kept it extremely quiet. I only found out about it by mistake after finding some coke and cannabis left out at his home, but I claimed I hadn't seen it when he tried to cover it up. I started phoning some of my more shady clients and making some subtle inquiries about collecting some samples that they were willing to part with. After a few days, I acquired a large enough cash to make my strategy work. A month later, I hosted friends around for a barbecue night, including Harry. I urged Harry to remain the night and sleep it off after ensuring that I had adequately liquored him up. In the early hours of that morning, I took the narcotics and a variety of my personal stuff and hid them in different locations around his vehicle, the largest amount being in his tire well. I secured the vehicle and went inside to sleep, certain that he wouldn't discover them during the next several months while the remainder of my plan took effect. After bringing him home, I also left some additional drugs and personal stuff in his house since he was still too inebriated to drive. I faked a break-in a few days later by shattering the rear glass of my back door into my kitchen and left it open before returning to the city for a flight. I received many mails as soon as I arrived. One from my plainly worried mother, who had discovered the damaged back door and contacted the cops, one from Catherine in tears, and one from the local cops requesting me to call. After receiving all of the calls, I notified the cops that I was away on business and would return the following week to speak with them. While I was gone, I requested Catherine to remain with my parents until I returned, and I urged my father to arrange for one of the local security firms to install cameras and an alarm system after receiving permission from the police, so that the crime scene would not be ruined. When I got home, I went through my usual "me God, I can't believe this has occurred, and why would someone do this?" routine. After thoroughly searching every room, discovering that the goods I had stolen were missing, and making a police complaint, I had the security company's representative walk Catherine and me through how the cameras and alarm system operated. Then came the inquiry I had been anticipating. What happens if we are doing business and do not want it recorded? She pretended to be bashful when she asked this inquiry, but I understood precisely why she was questioning me. He informed us that this was a common concern, and we were taught on the home computer, if we wanted to do things without being filmed, how to disable the recording for certain cameras so that we could preserve her modesty. As I was leading him out, I asked him whether, if the cameras were turned off, a notice might be sent out as a security measure. He came back in and walked me through the process of setting up email alerts before leaving. Stay tuned for next part.